I remember that morning starting off exactly the way I liked it. Quiet, predictable, almost boring in the best way. I got on the bus with my headphones in one hand and my coffee in the other, already planning to zone out for the next 20 minutes. Same route, same time, same half-asleep crowd. Honestly, it felt like just another day I wouldn't even remember. I grabbed my usual seat near the middle, the one that lets me lean against the window without someone bumping into me every 5 seconds. The bus hummed along, nothing unusual. I was halfway through scrolling my messages when we stopped at one of the bigger pickup points. That's when she got on. She was this small, pleasant-looking older woman with a soft smile, the kind of person who instantly makes you straighten up a little, just out of respect. She didn't rush or hesitate. She just moved with that calm confidence older people sometimes have, like they've long stopped caring about the pace of everyone else. And even though there were open seats all around, she chose the spot right next to me. She gave me a quick nod, almost like we already knew each other. And I don't know why, but it felt nice. Comforting, even. There was something about her presence that made the bus feel warmer, like the ride had suddenly turned into one of those small, quiet moments of humanity you don't usually notice during a commute. I remember thinking that this was the kind of person who probably had 100 stories to tell, one of those grandmothers who carried peppermint candy in their purse and remembered everyone's birthday. I didn't talk to her, though. I just settled back into my routine, assuming everything around me was as ordinary as ever. But I had no idea that her peaceful presence, the same one that made the ride feel so familiar and safe, was about to become the catalyst for a sudden, unsettling shift. I remember the bus settling into that steady rhythm it always had on weekday mornings, that soft rumble that almost rocks you into a trance. The woman beside me had been quiet the whole ride, hands folded over her purse, eyes drifting between the window and the floor. She looked tired in that way older folks sometimes do, the kind of tired you don't question. After a while, I felt this light pressure against my arm. At first, I thought we just hit a bump in the road, but then I felt her slowly leaning in, her head easing right onto my shoulder. And I froze for a second. I mean, it's not every day a stranger just settles into you like that. My first instinct was to pull away because it felt awkward, like I'd suddenly been cast as someone's grandson without any warning. But then I glanced down at her. She looked peaceful, almost relieved, like she'd finally found a comfortable spot after a long morning. And honestly, I didn't have the heart to wake her or make her feel embarrassed. So I just sat there, trying to look normal while my brain was doing this whole internal freakout. I kept telling myself, it's fine, she's just tired. People doze off on buses all the time. It's not a big deal. But a part of me couldn't shake this tiny, nagging thought that something felt a little off. Not wrong exactly, just strange. The kind of feeling you brush aside because you don't want to make a fuss. So I stayed still, letting her rest on my shoulder as the bus kept winding through the city, stop after stop. I figured she'd wake up eventually, maybe apologize, maybe laugh it off. And honestly, I figured I'd just forget about the whole thing by the afternoon. But then my stop came up. I gently tried to shift, ready to tap her shoulder and wake her. And that's when things didn't go as expected. I remember leaning toward her, still half-focused on whatever podcast I was listening to, and quietly saying, "Ma'am, this is your stop coming up." She'd been so chatty earlier that it felt natural to give her a little heads up. But she didn't move, not even a blink. At first, I thought maybe she'd just fallen into one of those deep naps older folks sometimes take, so I gave her the softest nudge on the elbow. Nothing. That's when this weird chill ran through me. I tried again, a little firmer, whispering her name because she'd told it to me earlier. Still no response. And the way her head was angled, it didn't look like sleep anymore. It looked wrong. My brain immediately tried to bargain with reality, like, no, you're overthinking this. She's fine. She has to be fine. but my hands were already shaking. I touched her shoulder, just for a second, and it was the kind of stillness that tells you more than you want to know. I felt my stomach drop. Honestly, I didn't know what to do. I could feel people behind us getting restless because the bus was slowing for traffic, and here I was frozen, sitting next to someone who might have passed away while I was rambling about my day to her an hour earlier. I finally stood up and signaled the driver. I must have looked pale because he didn't even question me, he just pulled over. When he walked back and saw her, his whole expression changed. He let out this quiet breath, like he already knew before he even checked. A couple of passengers gasped. Someone covered their mouth. The whole bus suddenly felt heavy and silent, like everyone was holding the same confused, helpless breath. And I just stood there, feeling like the floor beneath me wasn't solid anymore. And that was the moment it really hit me. The aftermath was going to force me to process what had just happened to me and to her. When the authorities finally got there, everything on the bus seemed to slow down. The paramedics moved with this calm, practiced certainty, and even though no one said it out loud, we all knew what they were about to confirm. I stepped aside so they could reach her, but I caught myself watching their hands, waiting for some tiny sign I'd been wrong. There wasn't one. After a few minutes, one of them gave me a small nod, gentle, almost grateful, and that was it. I grabbed my bag and stepped off the bus, and the cold air outside hit me harder than I expected. I just stood there on the sidewalk, feeling like I'd walked out of a completely different world than the one everyone else was still living in. I kept replaying it in my head, the way she'd smiled when I sat down, how peaceful she looked. I thought she was just sleeping, the way people do on early morning rides. It didn't make sense that someone's last moments could happen right beside me, quietly, without any sign that something so final was unfolding. Honestly, I felt guilty for not noticing sooner, even though I knew there was nothing I could have done. I remember thinking how strange it was that a normal commute, something I barely ever pay attention to, had turned into this moment I suddenly felt responsible for. Not in a heroic way, more like I'd been a witness to something private that didn't belong to me, but was handed to me anyway. Cars were rushing by, people were going about their day, and there I was, just trying to wrap my head around the fact that she'd taken her last ride sitting right next to me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just real and oddly human in a way I didn't know how to process. And as I stood there, still shaken, it hit me that the feeling wasn't going to fade quickly, which leads into how the rest of that day quietly stayed with me. I kept replaying everything in my head, the small talk we'd had, the way she smiled, the way I didn't notice anything was wrong until it was already over. At first, it really messed with me. I mean, who expects something like that to happen on a normal morning bus ride? But the more I sat with it, the more this odd feeling crept in, like maybe there was something quiet and meaningful buried in the whole thing. I remember thinking about how she'd leaned slightly toward me, like she felt safe sitting there. And I know it sounds strange, but that actually brought me a weird sense of peace. I didn't know her story, what kind of morning she'd had, who she was heading to see, or if anyone was waiting for her at all. All I knew was that her last moments weren't spent alone on some cold seat. She had someone beside her, even if that someone had no idea what was happening. Honestly, that thought hit me harder than the shock of everything else. It made me look at the whole ride differently, like the universe had handed me this tiny reminder that you never really know what the person next to you is carrying. Most days, I barely look up from my phone. I don't notice anyone. We're all just trying to get somewhere. But now, every time I step onto a bus or walk through a crowd, I find myself paying a little more attention, wondering what's going on in people's lives that I'll never see. It didn't fix the heaviness of the moment, but it did shift something in me. It made the day feel, I don't know, sharper, more real, like I'd been nudged awake in a way I wasn't expecting. And as I finally stepped off that bus and the doors shut behind me, I could already tell the rest of my day wasn't going to feel like any ordinary day. I was walking into it changed, carrying a quiet lesson I didn't ask for but couldn't ignore.